All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, Elizabeth. And just want to say a quick thank you to the team who's making all of this possible today. Zoom webinar is always can always be a little tricky. So really have an incredible team, Elizabeth and Katya, behind the scenes who are helping make this possible. Well, good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Nikki Tasiello and I am Build Within's Northern California Innovation Hub Executive Director. And just a quick housekeeping note, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, so please drop your questions into the Q&A box throughout our conversation and we'll get to as many as we can. All right, it's National Apprenticeship Week, and for the team at Build Within, that's not just a calendar moment, it's a reflection of something we think about every day. And before I introduce our guest, I want to share a little bit about Build Within because I think it's relevant to why we're having this conversation today. We came to this work the same way a lot of employers do, by doing it ourselves. Over a decade ago, we were a tech company building our own teams through apprenticeships. We saw how well the model worked, but we also saw how hard it was to manage and how few technology tools existed to support apprenticeships at any real scale. So we built them. That became Build Within. Now we are an AI-powered technology company and a U.S. Department of Labor registered apprenticeship national program sponsor, supporting over 15,000 apprentices, more than 700 employers, with over 50 apprenticeship occupations approved by US DOL and various state agencies. But we've never stopped being practitioners. We've spent years delivering workforce services on the ground, sitting inside the system, learning where the friction lives. And I think that experience, first as employers, then as practitioners, gives us a particular perspective on what's working, what isn't, and what needs to change. Which brings me to why this conversation matters so much right now. I know we're all feeling it. AI is moving fast, faster than most companies are prepared for, faster than the labor market is prepared for, and honestly, faster than our education system is prepared for. And the question of who gets access to opportunities being created in this shift in our labor market is not just a social question. It really is an enterprise question. It's a workforce question. And it's one that I honestly don't think any single employer, any single university, any single um, department can answer alone. It really does take collective effort. So today I want to explore that. What does it actually take to build an internal case for workforce development, in particular apprenticeships, as a strategic priority? And what does it look like when employers decide to tackle this together rather than each one trying to figure it out alone? And there is nobody better to have this conversation with than our guest today. Una King is the Chief Economic Opportunity Officer at Uber, and she is really right in the middle of doing this work. A couple of brief notes on Una's background before. Just want to say Una was elected to British Parliament at 29, the second woman of color to serve, and went on to be voted by her fellow MPs as the MP most likely to change society. She served as senior policy advisor to the Prime Minister, was appointed to the House of Lords, and changed the law more than 15 times across housing, employment, children's rights, and equalities policy. Then she moved into tech, leading inclusion efforts at British Broadcast Channel 4, Google, YouTube, and Snap, and is now at Uber leading their efforts on economic opportunity. And welcome, Una. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Nikki, so great to be there. By the way, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. You're doing
I'm yeah, I'm the person least likely to be able to get off mute. So just wanted to check that. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I feel that. I was having background issues earlier that I just could not figure out. So, tech, blessing and curse. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I know I just kind of gave a really brief highlight of your background, but I'd love to hear it from you in your own words. What are the experiences that have shaped how you think about access to opportunity and pathways to success?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess obviously one of the most formative ones was being a parliamentarian who was elected to represent the constituency that I had. It's a place in East London. And that constituency, the East End of London, has the highest density of poverty in the United Kingdom. But the really extraordinary thing, I mean, a politician will always tell you why their place is the most extraordinary, but it truly was a really extraordinary thing that this kind of crucible of poor working and living conditions, which is why Britain ended up with a national health service. It was born and conceived there because of the high infant mortality rates. They were so high there in my part of London. The extraordinary thing about it is it's sandwiched between the United Kingdom's two richest, biggest money generating business areas. That is Canary Wharf on one side of the constituency, and then the City of London on the other. So that was a very formative experience. It also, the East End of London is where there were successive waves of immigration, and it was very much shaped, a bit like America, I guess, by those waves of immigration. In fact, I always remember going to a mosque in my constituency, and it was built on the site of where prior to that, it was a Jewish place of worship. Prior to that, it was the Huguenots, and prior to that, it had been a church. And, you can literally see that impact. But I never got over the fact that I was representing people living on the margins often. And those experiences. I mean, I should say I didn't grow up in a wealthy part of town, but I had a quintessentially middle class experience in one way, certainly. I was brought up by a single mother, but that single mother was a teacher. And
Mm,
although she didn't have a high income at all, and I really remember being one of the kids, for example, that was not allowed to go on the school skiing trip. Out of 35 kids, five of us, no, you haven't got the money. You can stay here while your other 30 schoolmates go and fly to the south of France and go skiing. I was like, what? That wouldn't happen these days, I don't think. I don't think they would do that to kids. But what I did have was her conviction that I would go to university and her conviction that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And so I remember the reason I decided I wanted to become a politician is she was crying one day watching TV, and I was like, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "Oh, you wouldn't understand. I was about 5 years old at the time. I believe right then I wanted to be an air hostess because I thought it was cool to travel. But she said, I'm so upset. Children are starving." And it's because politicians aren't doing their job properly. I didn't know what a politician was, but I thought, okay, I'll try and be one of those. And if I do my job properly, maybe my mum won't cry. But many years later, I think the fundamental inequity of how you distribute, the resource that a company has, that a country has, that a society has, those are the things that still move me today.
yeah, yeah. I feel like there's so much to unpack there. And I think about some of the parallels to the Bay Area where I'm at, right? Where it's, some of the largest companies doing the most innovative work, and it sometimes can be sandwiched between communities that are being pressed.
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that everyone is able to not just have access to opportunity, but really to, have long-term career growth? And so I just would love to get your thoughts on like how do we ensure that these pathways that we're looking at aren't just about creating access, but really about long-term career growth and mobility?
Yeah, and that really comes down to how companies themselves are thinking about it when people get in. I think, it's amazing we spend so long trying to figure out how to change hiring practices, how to open up companies to all the talent that is out there. And then, if you succeed, when you succeed, you forget that that's just the door opening.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry to mix metaphors, but really at the moment, if you get non-traditional talent, and by non-traditional, I mean those who don't have parents who've been in tech, who are tech executives or business that, have worked in the corporate world, understand all of the unwritten rules. There's like this invisible curriculum
Mhm.
that so many people, especially first generation students and others from underrepresented groups, opening the door, access is huge. Of course, it is huge. But what's the point of access if you don't give anyone a meaningful chance once they step through the door. And the mixed metaphors I was talking about, I always think about it. It's like, you're hiring people. I mean, I spend a lot of time, I've worked at, I was at Google and YouTube and Snap and now Uber, and I convene quite a lot of tech companies. So I'm speaking to my colleagues who are doing my job at Apple and Amazon and, Intel and Cisco and all these places. And we spend so much time getting people in. And then we're looking at the attrition rates
Mm,
afterwards, like 6 months, 18 months, 3 years after. And it's like, wow, we're like, what we're doing, it's like filling the bath up with the plug out. We're
yeah.
bringing people through the front door and pushing them out through the back door. And so that fundamentally has to change. I do think, I mean, I want to bring in AI early, hard in this conversation.
Yeah.
That this is a moment in time when actually we could change things because I've been in the inclusion space. You said I was elected when I was much younger. It was 1997 when I became a member of Parliament. I was the second woman of color elected to the UK Parliament, although the 200th woman of any color, and I must be very old just to save you the time. Next year I will be 60, so I'm very old. But nonetheless, I find it extraordinary that in all that time and all the progress we've made, fundamentally, non-traditional talent has far less chance of
Mm,
either getting in the door or being retained and developed inside any organization, but especially the hardest ones to crack, like the most elite professions, industries, etc. And that's a devastating indictment on human beings, really. And the fact that we do stereotype people, we don't offer people the same opportunities. And so, really, there's this moment now where we can use AI either to replicate all those decisions and biases that lead to those outcomes. And sometimes I want to say it's not really human to human bias. It's like the bias of how much investment did you have in you before the age of 16? Like,
hmm
that gap is just extraordinary. We can't solve for all of those things within a corporate environment. We can't exactly change society on the outside, but we can be cleverer about how we deal with the gap that is thrown up by all those differences, by the difference in investment. And that's one thing we're looking at Uber,
Yeah. Yeah.
with in great detail.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point around, this moment that AI is bringing. One, it's a technology moment, right? Like technology is changing and it has an opportunity to, I think, democratize how we disseminate information and skills. But it's also a moment, an inflection point for the workforce, for the labor market, for companies to think about exactly what you're talking about. How do we bring people in? How do we keep them? And so I would just like to as you're looking at, the work you're doing at Uber, and how have you really made this a strategic focus at Uber? And in particular, thinking about these pathways like apprenticeships to become, a real topic at executive tables. I'm just curious, like, how has that worked in what you're doing?
Yeah, and I want to be really clear and transparent up front. It's not that Uber has all the answers. However, we do we do sit at this really critical intersection at this moment in time, which is the nexus between tech and how you receive and can access that actual tech in the real world, physically on the ground. Does the car appear? Will the food arrive?
Mm,
And do you have an opportunity to earn, using the platform, etc.? So that intersection is a really interesting place to be. We don't have all the solutions, but I have a really firm and strong belief over basically 3 decades at this point, trying to see how you can tilt the scales towards greater equity in terms of what we're doing. And I I really feel that this moment where we can decide how we build AI systems and what those systems optimize for. And AI is a tool. We know that. You've heard that. Everyone's heard that. And tools, you can use tools for good or tools for bad. It depends
mhm.
whose hands they're in and what that person is thinking of at the time. So our job right now is to persuade companies, first of all, that we want to do everything in our power at this moment, this inflection point, to build safeguards into the AI so that we have responsible AI as opposed to rampant AI. Well, it's going to be rampant, whatever you say, but still, everyone can understand the concept that you can either have AI as something that is scaling human bias and replicating that human bias, or you can build it in such a way and implement it in such a way that it is instead scaling opportunity. And that is what my team and that yes, I'm responsible for thinking about how we increase economic opportunity, especially for non-traditional talent, those that have been locked out from
Hmm.
that opportunity. Everybody knows talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. It's like, okay, yeah, we get that. But how are you actually, in practical terms, going to open up? And that's where apprenticeships are the most direct route to drawing that line between
Hmm.
non-traditional talent and opportunity. Now, it still doesn't mean that tech companies go, oh, yeah, great, fab, we'll have some of that, because the point is they can be very bureaucratic. And there's a fundamental just problem at the outset that, again, I want to be really transparent about. It depends which tech you're talking about. Obviously, there are a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises all across the country who are in desperate need of tech talent and IT skills. But tech companies, large tech companies, big tech, they don't need, well, sorry, they do need the talent. It's just today isn't when the crisis point is. Today,
Hmm.
the problem those big tech companies have is they've got talent coming out of their ears. They can't even sort through all the people that are applying for jobs. As my VP of talent acquisition was telling me the other day, we received 2 million applications from people who want to
Wow.
work at Uber. If I go to her and say, you need to focus on talent pipelines. She's like, no, I don't.
Hmm.
But,
Hmm.
but what that answer doesn't take into account, and what she also recognizes, is that if we shut down that talent pipeline, and we are currently in the US in tech, basically we are not employing entry-level engineers through a combination of outsourcing, offshoring, and AI itself. We are removing the first rung of the career ladder.
Hmm.
But in
Yeah.
5 years' time, we're still going to need the mid-level engineers, but we will have decimated the pipeline. So actually, it's about getting leaders, especially in the tech area that I work in, to situate themselves in the future and have some self-interest from a future forward point of view. Because right here, right now, their life isn't going to fall apart if they don't open up their talent pipelines. But you've got to think, and I'm always asking people to think, more holistically. Think about the country, think about the economy. Now, that argument, anyone who works inside a business environment knows that a business leader is actually not, on the whole, going to be saying, let me think about what the country needs. What does society need? No, that's not going to be how they make their decisions or focus things. But if you can show them that their interest, their self-interest, is directly linked to a longer range resolution to deal with some of these acute problems that are only going to be accelerated more than we can imagine by AI, then you can hook them into that conversation. But I want to be clear. No one's saying it's easy. And the last point I would make on this is that I fundamentally believe because it is so difficult, we have to take a collective approach going forward.
I love that. And I do want to just, kind of underscore that idea of like it may not be for some companies an immediate talent issue.
Exactly.
But and so how do you paint that picture of, hey, yes, it may not be tomorrow that you can't find the talent you need, but there will be a point at which we have reached the finite resources we have
Yeah,
and that we've trained and get in front of it. I think we've seen
exactly.
how, especially in the tech space where companies have looked, into the future and seen like, oh, this is what's possible. It's like, how can you do that with talent? How to
Yeah,
use those skill sets to start to look
yeah,
at it through talent. And I love that kind of framing because it is asking them to use their imagination a little bit.
exactly.
And that it's not something that can be done alone. And so you talked about kind of bringing together this collective effort. because I do think we are seeing that it isn't just one company that's going to figure it out. It isn't one school or even, like it is not just higher education. It's really a whole set of partners and stakeholders that need to come together. And so I know you've been doing some really deep thinking about this and a lot of footwork. And so would just love to hear from you kind of around this collective effort. Why is it so important that you're bringing these folks together, and how are you looking to do that?
Yeah, and essentially, I think we have to remember that workforce development. Now, let's be honest. Workforce development, rarely would you find a less sexy combo. Like, who is excited about workforce development? Well, I mean, we are, and the people on this call, thank you for taking that interest. But actually, I think people are going to realize in the coming months and years that workforce development is as intrinsic to national security as any other huge and critical infrastructure component, like energy, like transport. And yet, we have a fraction of the amount of coordination focused around here. Instead, what we're doing is entirely fragmented. I think I mean, in the tech space, let me not speak for all sectors and all within tech. There are some excellent pockets of best practice, but overall, the picture is a fragmentation. And that's why a coalition is so important
Mhm.
because what it enables you to do is, first of all, you can look at standardizing things and you can look at doing things that one single company on their own is never going to put the time, resource, effort, etc. But if you come together to do it, then it can make sense. It can actually add up from a business case point of view. Scaling, you can then scale through a coalition, what you cannot do with an individual company. Policy alignment, you can get those companies together to lobby more effectively so that, for example, the Department of Labor and others who are in this space who are saying, for example, they want 1 million new apprentices. And then it's like when I go to individual companies, including my own, saying, hey, yeah, so who wants to sign up for apprentices? And there is a deafening silence often,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
that's because we haven't actually been able to align um, what is in the interests of the companies, maybe not today, but in a couple of years' time, plus the fact of urgency, e.g., if we try and put this workforce development infrastructure together in 3 years' time, it'll be too late. So, one of the things that I do try and get people to do is to understand this workforce development thing that we talk of. Why should they care? And I realized for myself personally, I mean, you can probably hear I was brought up in the UK, and in the UK, I being born when I was, which was only it wasn't very long after the Second World War. Now, I mean, it was 1967, swinging 60s, but actually, it was just over 20 years
Mhm.
since the end of the war of the Second World War. And in my childhood, that's all anybody ever spoke about. Well, never mind, whatever went wrong here, guess what? Britain won the war. Funny thing is, Britain lost the peace. Germany won the peace. They surpassed Britain, left us in the dust to become, in economic terms, to become Europe's largest and strongest economy. And how did they do that? Honestly, most people will say the reason they did that, the single most overwhelming component of their success was a very comprehensive workforce development system that brought together government with intermediaries, with a sort of state, federal infrastructure in a way that connected communities that I see it in America, I see it in Britain, I see it in many places, are disconnected from the economy. Right, you
Mhm.
need a strategy to deal with that, or especially in an age of AI, you will be facing increased social costs. You will be facing a greater mass unemployment, possibly not seen on a scale since the Great Depression. So it is in everyone's interests, but aligning people, I think the most effective way for us to do that is collectively.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that kind of how do you take what can feel very overwhelming as an idea and really bring it down to what matters most? And when you're thinking about the companies that you're going to and kind of try and sharing with them and talking to them about this, I'm really curious, like how are you what is the message that's resonating or that, especially as these leaders are focused on the bottom line, again,
Yeah.
like that idea of like how do you create urgency and business relevance in this time that we're in and in these conversations where workforce development does sound a bit clunky, or the idea of apprenticeships can feel like it can be a bit of a challenging concept to deliver. I'm just curious, like, what are the messages that are resonating?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start with economics. You have to start with the bottom line. What is it costing them to hire? How long does it take? What's the risk? When you can show that some of these models and these collective ideas of how you can gain advantages of scale in providing placements for people, in creating training curriculum, etc. And there's a ton of stuff out there, obviously. But when you can show that it can actually subsidize hiring, reduce time to productivity, create a more predictable pipeline, even though, as I've said, pipeline itself at this moment in time isn't the biggest problem. But that does shift the conversation. There's no point me going to them and saying you are a morally reprehensible person if you don't love workforce development. It's just not gonna resonate. And people always want to people always want to force me into what I perceive to be a false choice, which is, do you want to do these programs because you're gonna persuade them using the ethical messaging and it's a values based approach to inclusion, or do you just do the business bottom line, which I was mentioning a minute ago? And I say loudly, you have to do both. Right,
Hmm.
you have to do both. Of course, there's an ethical value. Of course, it's wrong to exclude people from the workforce, and of course, that is not going to be the argument that wins the day inside corporations who are figuring out how they are going to stop their, stock price crashing over the next 8 week period. Right.
Hmm.
So you just have to understand that there can be more than two right approaches. We got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And
Hmm.
I will underline, yes, you're a great human being. If you truly are an inclusion advocate, yes, excellent, amazing. And look at how smart inclusion will virtually always improve the bottom line. And personally, I won't divorce those two arguments.
I love that. And I do think there is a world in which it's a yes and, right? It's not,
Exactly.
as opposed to that it's an either or. It's like, yes, and we can do this. And I think it's been proven that when you open up your talent pool,
Yeah.
then you get a much broader perspective, right? As we were talking about AI and building AI so that it doesn't have bias. Well, if you have people from different lived experiences, that is a surefire way to help mitigate building tools that have inherent bias, right? We know all of that. But it does sound, as you're saying, like really being able to have that kind of language of the business is
Yeah.
very important. And being
Yeah.
able to speak to what's important to business, in addition to understanding the social costs, is really
Yeah.
where it's important. So it just, again, like thinking about folks on the call as they're going out to their leadership as employers, or they're going and moving forward with trying to get employers on board with apprenticeship, just like what have you found most effective? Again, as well as building those coalitions, like what's a message that kind of resonates across companies too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to understand that the nature of work is changing, that we do want to recruit from different places, that we do want to remove barriers like unpaid training, that we do want to redesign hiring criteria around skills. I mean, the whole conversation about a skills-based approach and what that means, it's actually skills-based approach has actually been a swear word for a lot of chief people officers. They're like, I mentioned it with my chief people officer, not to breach any confidentiality. She wouldn't mind if I say this. She was like, "That's just wasted my time 3 years." In other words, what she meant was, we've spent years trying to figure out how we move to a skills-based approach, and we've written all these competencies, and we've done all this, and I haven't seen it move the needle. I do think that when you now attach a skills-based approach to AI, and the capacity that AI gives you, and also what you're having to do with AI, which is to break jobs down into roles and to break roles down into tasks, and then to figure out who's got the skills. to be able to do that, it opens up, it's a whole new ball game. So, I mean, I think the fundamental message that I try to get across is that if you keep the same inputs and the same processes, you're going to get the same outcomes. You're going to keep banging your head against a brick wall.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
if you're not, then you have to understand that the moment we're living in now is going to change both those things. It's going to change the inputs and it's going to change if you are intentional about it, it's going to change the processes. And those two things, different inputs and different processes, should change outcomes. But we are at that critical juncture. And
Hmm.
that's what's really exciting to me because, like those years, these years, decades that I've spent in inclusion, I spend most of my time trying to course correct what a system or a process that was created. No one created the process thinking, let's see how we can lock women out. Oh, we don't want any people with disabilities here, and et cetera, for any number of underrepresented groups. They don't start that way, but it ends up that way. And then people in the inclusion space, their job is to tear it down. This is a moment in history when our job is to build it up. And so I
Mm.
would I would inspire everyone, or I would seek to inspire people to take that opportunity. It is
Mhm.
an extraordinary moment in time.
I love that reframing of how do we like build up versus tear down. Like this does give us an opportunity to build something different. And that's kind of where I've been really excited is okay, yes, disruption, we're here, it's happening. But what within disruption, I think there can be a really an opportunity. Crisis is the mother of invention, right? And for me, I see like opportunity may not be in something that's like new, but really kind of leaning into what's worked. And that, as you were talking about the German system, we know that there are systems and apprenticeships when you're talking about skills-based hiring. That is apprenticeships. It is essentially how do we find ways to lean into what has worked and then, kind of on top of that, add in these new elements like AI that can be so, not just informative, but formational in this work. And so I'm going to open it up for some questions because I feel like you and I have been talking, and I feel like I could talk to you all day, Una, about this. Honestly, you just inspire me to want to go out there and beat the drum for sure.
Well, back at you.
Yeah,
Thank
as
you
I
for
as
what
I
you do.
already am, but one thing I'm curious about, and you've talked a little bit about this when you're talking about like the coordination efforts that you're doing, is where is the role of all the different stakeholders, in particular government and policy, and the role that they need to play, and what have you seen work well? And I think you bring a perspective that's interesting too, because you have an international perspective, not just one that's a US focused one. But I'm just curious, like what role does government and policy need to play, and where have you seen those types of partnerships work well?
Yeah, I mean, look, government plays a critical role, obviously, in terms of funding, in terms of setting standards. And I'd say the biggest opportunity, I mean, I'm talking from where I sit, looking out, trying to persuade tech companies that it is in their interests to assign headcount for apprenticeships and earn as you learn opportunities, because that is fundamentally where you address the opportunity and access gap. There's no
Mhm.
point saying, oh, hey, you can come in if you can afford to live, with a very in a place with a high standard, high cost of living and no income. I mean, obviously, that's not going to work. But so with governments being able to set standards and create those incentives, I often think, especially when I speak to you, Nikki, and obviously, you and Philip and the team at Build Within have, lifted up the hood in some respects. But I feel that there isn't the progress yet that we need to see in aligning the opportunity that's already there and the incentives that are already there. I mean, I could say, oh, I'd love to build a whole new system and we should do it like this. And, I think our competitors, I'm talking about, I don't know, whether it's China, Singapore, Europe, um, they do this thing of connecting their education and their employers and their federal and government incentives much more coherently than we do. And I just don't think we can afford to be so disjointed. I mean,
Mm,
like clearly, it's not a clever decision, but the reason it happens is because each individual unit, each individual company, it doesn't make sense for them to do it on their own. So for me, it does come back to this point, and that's why it's great to see, people on this call to figure out how we can get more traction working collectively. And when I
mm,
used to work at 10 Downing Street in the Prime Minister's office, I realized, people never want to tell the people in power what is actually happening.
mhm,
They'll always give them a yes version
mhm,
according to what they think they want to hear. And that's probably even more so the case here today, where we are. But it's a feature of power and
mhm,
governance. And I think we need some courage. We need some courage to name the obvious problems. And then we need the courage, which I think there is safety in numbers. An individual business doesn't want to come out and bang the table here or there. And that might be disappointing. It might be sad. I long ago left behind my desire for perfection because that gets you
mm,
nowhere. And, I never want the best to be the enemy of the good. It would be good if we could align, corporate America's favorite word, align on some collective action that fundamentally is helping. I think we need to help businesses also get over, and I understand the irritation and the discomfort that can come from this sentence that I'm going to say, but we need to help businesses get over the fact that it's never going to be in their interest to open up a headcount for an apprentice when the same headcount they could open up for a director. Right, you've
mm.
just got to think of it from their point of view, or you don't have to, but then you won't change how they act, right?
Yeah.
And so at the moment, we haven't overcome that stumbling block, really. And I think the only way we're going to overcome it is collectively. Anyway, that's a bit opaque if you're not up to your ears in how you align all of the government funding, whether it's WeOver and Pell and pay for performance and, all of that. But fundamentally, it is not, in a sort of single path that employers can go down. They would have to go down like 15 simultaneous paths, and so they choose not to step along the path at all. So
Hmm.
that's,
Hmm.
what I'm trying to do with the coalition that we're working
Yeah.
on around workforce development.
Yeah, and I do think there is a lot of opacity in the process as a business trying to engage and access some of these incentives that as you said, they exist. It's not that they don't exist. It's how do, I feel like there's a gap in knowledge that employers may not know what's out there and how to access it. And then I think on the other side, it's how do you get the alignment around what makes sense and those
Yeah.
pieces to come together. And it's not easy. So, and I know you've taken on this yeoman's task of really trying to bring together a collective effort and to have that um, come together. And so I think that I have another question here. And I think it's one, again, as we've talked about, understanding the language of business,
Mm,
understanding,
yeah.
what resonates is what is the biggest misconception you've run into when leaders first hear the words workforce development or apprenticeship? Like, what is
Yeah.
your
I mean,
the first
yeah.
reaction?
Yeah. Fundamentally, their reaction on the whole is, oh, here she comes asking us to engage in charity. Basically, right? I mean, sorry, I'm being a bit
Mm,
uncharitable in characterizing it like that. But my whole point here is workforce development is not charity, it is infrastructure.
hmm.
And those economies that are going to win the so-called race for AI are going to be those that have their infrastructure in place, right? So, and any company that thinks it's going to do well in a country that loses the race for AI is not actually thinking about their business reality and what it will be like. I mean, in Britain, We know what it's like to be, in a strong trading group and then a block, and then we know what it's like to not and to have a loss of your national capacity. Don't take it for granted, I would say to
Mm,
business leaders. The other misconception they have is they go, apprenticeships, they're not for tech, they're for the trades. And I'm like, look, of course, yeah, there's all the argument now you want to be a plumber again or get a humanities degree. There's this kind of like, the plumbers are going to be all right, and the psychologists, who knew, are going to be all right because everyone needs to figure out how to make AI and robots sound human. And guess what? Maybe if you've
mm,
got a humanities or a psychology degree, you can do that better. But fundamentally, people are still thinking apprenticeships and the training model is for the trades
yeah.
and for construction industries, whatever. And that is just we are going to be, I think the technical term is screwed if we don't get over that point. And then the last thing I'd say is really around just we are underestimating how much system misalignment there is.
Mm,
And I think we underestimate how much we could unlock the system to get it to work for us to have a win-win-win. You could have a win for business because they would have talent, that had AI fluencies ready to go. So the ramp up time would be less if our training systems were more closely aligned to what business actually needs. You'd have a win for the individuals because what we're really looking at in the work we're doing at Uber, my piece of the work we're doing is how can you connect disconnected communities as well to high growth jobs. And then, obviously you have a win, therefore, for those communities themselves that have been too often cut off from the path of economic growth. And when you look at the so-called Rust Belt or, other areas, so many areas in America where there is no connection point, for people in those communities, which is a fundamental unfairness that I think we need to address.
hmm. And when you're talking about systems misalignment, are you thinking the systems of the education system to employer
Yes,
misalignment,
I am
government to
thinking of
employer,
that.
or is it across all of
I
those efforts?
I am thinking of that. I mean, obviously, there's a huge conversation at the moment. Like, what's the point of a 4-year degree? I mean, given that, especially in tech, like if you're going to learn what the latest AI tech is, well, it'll be out of date in 6 weeks or 6 months, never mind 4 years. So
Hmm.
we're going to have to change the way we train people in that tech. We're going to have to change it for a whole number of reasons. We're not going to have those entry level roles. So actually, we're going to need apprenticeships because then you can't actually just by magic have people acquire that experience, even if AI does for the first time permit the use of the technology itself allows us to collapse, training timelines in a way we couldn't do before. But I'll tell you one other really exciting thing to me about AI tech is the tech itself now is enabling us. There are some studies, there are about 5 studies now. It's not enough. There will be more. But what they show is it's incredible that when you introduce AI into business operations, and they've done this, for example, they had a big study at BCG, so
Mm.
consultancy. They've then also done it at call centers, and there are a couple, like I said, there are about 5 studies out there. What they show is so interesting. It's that there are productivity gains. Like when you do it, the study that Harvard Business School actually went deep on, they were looking at the call centers. I was interested because Uber's got a lot of call centers. And what they found when they introduced AI was that you got a 15% uplift in productivity. Well, that's not a surprise. People would kind of expect that. What they did not expect was that productivity was driven by those employees who were labeled the weaker performers. The strong performers did not have the jump in productivity. Now, you can surmise why that may be. Maybe it's because AI is like, having the personalized training whispering in your ear that you never got as a kid when they were off at their coding summer camps or whatever it might have been, right? For whatever reason, and we've seen it again in other studies with the adoption of AI, that those that are out front at the moment actually do not get the same benefit. Those who we might characterize as the non-traditional talent, some people said maybe they're hungrier, maybe they know they need more help to get where someone else will get. and they see AI as something that can actually help them. That was what one Indian study showed. But my point is the technology itself, and also we've only had access to it for like the last 6 months. And what we know is going to be available in the next 6 months is going to leave that in the dust. So I think, again, it comes back to, Nikki, as you said, this inflection point. It is an inflection point, but you've got to get
Mhm.
prepared. It doesn't mean you've missed the boat now, but you will soon. And that will be the case for workforce development unless we put some of that shared infrastructure in place now.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I do think that it's really, again, coming down to how we deliver that training, right? And when it's happening and being able to connect it from what I'm learning in theory to what I'm doing on my job,
Yeah,
right? So as you were saying, as the AI and these operation settings are really helping them to perform their job better, that's because they're able to probably do them in tandem. And again, coming back to, as it's National Apprenticeship Week, that's exactly what apprenticeships are intended to
yes,
deliver, is that opportunity to use to learn the theoretical and put it into practice together. And that really sticks when you're
yeah.
thinking about learning. I do have a question from the audience, and it's around integrating AI into your own workflows or daily routines. Are you doing that yourself, to build your professional skills?
I love this question. Yes, I am. I mean, I started off like most people on ChatGPT. I am I now use Claude a lot. I would say most people on this call, if you're on this call, you will know, you're already among an elite, really, in many ways. But I would say there is the difference at the moment between those people who use AI to optimize their emails, which I will put my hand up for that, summarize their briefings, and all that stuff, which is essentially making you better and faster and quicker. What it's not doing is changing the game, right? It's not actually fundamentally changing what you do. It's just speeding up how you do it or making you sound
Mm.
more intelligent as you do it. But that it's not fundamentally changing the game. And the biggest gap that's going to open up is between people who can use AI to automate the areas to actually automate for them. Because I talk a really good game, right? Politicians do. But fundamentally, don't, do as I do, do as I say. Because
Yeah.
like my chief of staff, for example, he now gives me an automated weekly brief, so it's connected to email, Slack messages, company messages, the calendar. And what it does is it summarizes everything, but that's not the interesting thing. That's doing just what I said before.
I'm like, that
It's
sounds
just
pretty
making it
interesting.
more, but it's still, yeah, it is still amazing. He's done it because I told my whole team, I'm not to be horrible. I don't mean to be horrible, but all of us will lose our jobs if we don't get a grip on AI, right? It's
Mm.
that thing, as everybody says, you're not going to lose your job to AI, although some people will. Fundamentally, you're going to lose your job to someone in your area who got a grip on AI, right?
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I say this to my team all the time. And yes, I use some of it, but what I said to my team, you've got to start vibe coding. And in other words, you've got to start, which even when I first told them they had to do vibe coding was like over 6 months ago. In just that 6 month period, what that means now is that you can just use natural language processing. You can just use plain English.
Hmm.
You can use Claude Code to do just about anything. You can create your own apps. So you need to be thinking about what is the app that I can create that will allow me to go to the next stage in terms of strategy of my job, not just efficiency
I
of
love
my
that.
job. So I for a long time was on the bit where AI was making me more efficient, which is good because I'm inefficient. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear. But anyway, I can be inefficient. So now I'm much more efficient. Great, fabulous, if you like efficiency. But fundamentally, what I'm interested in is how is it going to enable me to have a strategic edge?
Mm.
And if you literally don't know where to start, as I imagine a lot of people, it's like, well, what do you mean? How am I going to have a more strategic edge? You put into Claude, ChatGPT, AI of choice, what your job is, what your goals are, and then you ask it, how can I increase my strategic edge? And then on everything and I got this from Jeff Woods actually. He does a podcast on basically how leaders can be strategic about using AI. And there are just some basic things that you need to do when you're using AI. You always need every prompt. You need to say, ask me 5 questions to improve your answer to me. If you haven't got time, you say, ask me 1 question, ask me 2 questions. And that
Mm,
iterative process is what will turn an AI answer from a C plus or a B plus into an A plus. And so just
I'm
the
putting that
habit that I've
down.
got in using the prompts better has made me, yes, faster, but much more important to me is that it is enabling me to get out ahead in terms of the strategic thinking, which at the end of the day, the strategic thinking and judgment, those are going to be the things that determine who succeeds in the AI economy.
Yeah, and that is actually a question from the audience here is how do you see durable skills, especially those acquired through personal life experience, beginning to gain value to
Yeah, they
employers?
absolutely are. I mean, I've been speaking to AI companies one large AI company told me recently that they're not hiring entry-level engineers anymore. The only roles that they are expanding are around like basically the people that can figure out how to make the AI sound more human. Basically. And then again, wow, I was reading something on LinkedIn this morning. She says unhelpfully not. I'll try and go into my LinkedIn and flag. It was a really interesting article on this point about AI skills and what people need to do to stay ahead. Yeah, I'll try and put something on my LinkedIn about that.
Yeah. Well, I do think, I love that kind of shift from efficiency to
Yeah,
strategic thinking.
yeah,
And that really does lean into then what is inherently human. So talking about those durable skills will be judgment, will be
yeah.
discernment. I was at a conference now, it's like 6 months ago, so everything's changed since then. But what they were talking about was really that AI doesn't have taste. It doesn't know what's good,
Yeah,
right? You can tell it what's good, but it doesn't necessarily know that inherently. That's something that we as humans kind of decipher for ourselves. So as we think about what that is and those experiences that we have are really what allow us to kind of determine that and have that judgment on things. And I love that the audience member talked about skills like resilience, conflict resolution, adaptability. These are
yeah.
especially, I think, adaptability when it comes to technology. Whew, we're learning how to be adaptable left, right, and center.
Absolutely. And I think of my 4 kids. My oldest is 20, my youngest is 12, which is a shame. Like I say, if I'm going to be 6 next year, why have I got a 12-year-old? But that's a question for another time. My 20-year-old, I spent, 10 years telling him it'd be really great if you did computer science. And why don't you do engineering? And he was like, no, mum, because I bloody hate it. And I was like, well, tut tut, that's not what the clever kids are doing. And he literally goes to me, he's like, well, it's a good job I didn't follow your advice, isn't it? It's a good job I didn't waste, all those years of my life doing computer science because no one's going to hire a computer scientist. Now, of course, that's not strictly speaking true, but it is true that all those people who learned how to code, and it was US policy and not just US, but globally, those skills are no longer giving them the edge in the
Mhm.
way they would have before. And a very dear friend of mine who runs the Center for Equity and Computing out of Georgia Tech, he's written an amazing book which basically looks at the gaps in how much, in the computer scientist pipeline, essentially, and that the biggest predictor, this is for the last 20 years, the biggest predictor of success in a computer science and tech track into tech companies was actually eighth grade algebra. He then did research on top of that
Mhm.
showed guess which schools don't have access to eighth grade algebra. And it was the schools where the black and brown kids were, but specifically African American and Hispanic. And that's a really great example, A, of an actual structural barrier. You talk about structural barriers all the time. It's like, well, if you need eighth grade algebra to get in, but the African American and the Hispanic kids aren't at schools where they teach eighth grade algebra, that's a structural barrier.
Yeah.
And the second thing it shows is how AI can wipe those structural barriers away because now you just need to be able to speak a language to direct Claude Code or whichever AI you're going to use to do the coding for you. So in that example, you have both the trauma of systemic prejudice, that's been built up in terms of our education system, and also to an extent the antidote. Now, whether we're going to take that antidote and make it readily available, that's what this conversation is about.
Yeah, and I think that's why conversations like this are important. The coalition of companies that you're working with to make sure we're having these conversations is so vital. And I'm cognizant of time. I literally feel like I could just sit with you all day, but recognize that we do have we'll be wrapping things up here in a couple minutes. So I just really, before we close out, Una, any last words, anything for the audience that you want to leave them with, or any calls to action that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the things we have to remind people again and again is that the cost of doing nothing is significant.
Mm.
I know it's so hard to act, and you say, oh, there's this risk and that risk and the other risk, but you've also got to think the risk of doing nothing here is significant. So, it is hard for me today to get leaders to think about talent shortages in my part of the economy, which is a particular part of the economy. But we are going to face growing talent shortages. We are going to face higher hiring costs if we do nothing. More jobs, we already know more jobs are going to be created outside the US instead of here. And that means our US workers, if we're not more intentional, are going to be locked out of the AI economy. And of course, what that
Mm.
means at a macro level is that we fall behind in terms of being competitive. So look, I want people to remember that you have to try and get people to think about the future, because if they're just thinking about the next 3 months, the next 12 months, it doesn't get us where we need to be. I also want to remind everyone that they need to get AI working for them. If you're sitting here today and thinking AI isn't working for you, I didn't get to the end of my sentence actually. I'm talking too much. But mind you, you did ask me to. But still, of personal use of AI. My chief of staff, he's now. I always say to him, I haven't got time to digest all this information. Like it was only 1 week that bloody happened and 1 week coming out. Why is it like 60 pages and like 300 linked reports? So he's turned that brief, used AI, click of a button, turn Una's weekly report into a podcast. So now I listen to two AI commentators telling me through a different format information that allows me that they then provide strategic insights in it is actually mind-boggling. So do that for yourself. It's ask AI, how would I turn my to-do list into a podcast, or some such, that sort of things, or the biggest challenges I'm facing, and learn to ingest the information that you need, because it can be overwhelming. And the other thing I'd say is, I hope you all, if you've got someone who you need to get things past, whether it's your manager, whether it's the board, whether it's the leadership team, you'll have heard it most probably, but it is really funny and helpful when you actually create their personality as an AI that will review your work in advance. Don't wait for them to tell you you screwed up here,
Mm.
there, or whatever. Get the AI to tell you what they're going to tell you. So my CEO, actually, Dara Khosrowshahi, he allowed the leadership team and the product teams to create a Dara AI. So you download your point of view, your views on the world, how you think about things, how you want your team to think about problems, and then you say, "Oh, I've got this deck I'm going to present to whoever it is you need to present to." You put it in that AI and it gives you what they're most likely to come back to you on. That allows you to appear the most well prepared, most strategically advanced person. And if it doesn't give you the specific strategic insights, you say, what strategic insights am I missing? Anything that you cannot think of the answer to, you ask for a first pass, and it just enables you. You still got to come up with the really important stuff yourself, but you're never, ever, ever again starting from a blank page. And that actually is fairly priceless. And we need the people who are on the side of the angels to be using AI for good.
I love that. Oh, I'm like, all of these things. Yep, yep. I'm gonna take them for myself. Thank you for all of this. I know we're at time. So thank you, Una. Agree. I think, there is a cost to doing nothing. And we really need to think about what are the levers we have today that can help us get to where we're going next, because it is moving so quickly. So thank you so much for coming today. And Thank you, everyone who joined us. Really appreciate those who put questions in the Q&A. And we'll wrap up. We'll be sending out some information after this. And Una, if you do find that LinkedIn article for
Yes.
us to share, we'd love to do that. But thank you again so much for being here today and for joining us on National Apprenticeship Week to talk about how we can reimagine talent. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks, Nikki, and thank you, Build Within. Really appreciate
Yeah.
it. Bye.
Bye.